Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Bill Moore here for Radio Vision Network, and this segment is entitled History for My Grandchildren. Today I want to talk about a pioneer Mexican aviator, Emilio Carranza. Emilio Carranza has a Burlington County connection, which I'll make as we go along in the show. I want to talk first about aviation in general. I say that Emilio Carranza was a pioneer Mexican aviator. This was back in the 1920s. He was a contemporary of Charles Lindbergh, the American, of course, who flew the first non-stop flight from New York to Paris alone. Okay? In the 1920s, aviation was very, very different. We didn't have the airlines that we have today. We didn't have the Federal Aviation Agency. We didn't have air traffic controllers. We didn't have radar. We didn't have the weather forecast that we have today. We didn't have the cockpit instrumentation that we have today. Planes today, some of the major airlines, those planes virtually fly themselves. Yes, they still need pilots, but they virtually fly themselves. Back then in the 1920s, it's what we referred to as seat of the pants flying. Okay? Emilio Carranza was on the cutting edge. He was born in the early years of the 20th century and matured in the early 1920s. Okay, what were some of his accomplishments? Well, Emilio Carranza made several long-distance, non-stop flights. Now let's talk about what these flights meant. They pioneered air routes between cities, which were later used by airlines, the fledgling airlines, which grew up into our airlines that we know today. Back in the 1920s, when he picked up his new airplane in San Diego, California, he flew that airplane non-stop to Mexico City, a distance of 1,875 miles. These weren't flights that were made at high altitude. They didn't have the ability to fly at high altitude. So these were low altitude flights without benefit of instrumentation. He made the flight alone. If he was looking at a map, he had to fly the plane and look at the map. No one else was there to help him. And you had to come down low enough so that you could see the topography to see where you were. These flights were monitored by people on the ground. People heard the plane. People saw the plane. It was reported all along the route. We just saw he just passed overhead. It's such and such a time. He's still on his way. Okay? These were pioneering flights. They involved extra gas tanks, extra all kinds of things structurally for the plane, which made the plane very heavy, very difficult to take off. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. He became so well known that a newspaper in Mexico City asked him to make a goodwill flight from Mexico City to Washington, D.C. This was a flight which would emulate or duplicate a flight made by Lindbergh the previous year. Okay, the newspaper's name was Excelsior. Remember that name because we're going to talk about it a little bit later. The money was raised by donations of all types of Mexican citizens. Charles Lindbergh himself donated $2,500 for this plane. Okay? A committee was formed and they decided that the best long-distance aircraft was one just like Charles Lindbergh used to fly the Atlantic in 1927. A Ryan monoplane, and it was referred to as a Ryan high-wing monoplane because the wing was up top. Monoplane means one wing. Okay? This aircraft was contracted to be built in San Diego, California by the Mahoney Aircraft Factory. And this is where Carranza, Emilio, picked up that plane and flew it solo from San Diego to Mexico City. Now, interestingly enough, that is still the longest solo flight by a Mexican, and that was made way, way back in the 1920s. Now let's fast forward a little bit, a year or two, and the plane's been bought, the plane's at Mexico City, and preparations are underway for his goodwill flight from Mexico City to Washington, D.C. Something that they didn't consider at first, but they had to, was the fact that they had to lengthen the runway at Mexico City because the heavily fuel-laden aircraft needed much more room to take off. So with that underway and with preparations with the airplane, finally Carranza was able to take off. And it was reported all across Mexico as he flew north. When he flew over the border, over the Rio Grande, it was reported, we see the plane. He just passed such and such a town. It's 7 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock. He's on his way. As he flew north into the southeastern United States, he encountered some weather problems. There was some fog and some other weather problems. Now remember, he's never flown this route before. He's got a map, and he's got things that he's looking for on the ground. So he's not very high. So he's encountering fog. Well, he finally was forced to land in, of all places, Mooresville, North Carolina. Mooresville is about 300 miles south of Washington, D.C. Stayed the night there, and the next day preparations were made, and he flew into Washington, D.C. to a hero's welcome. There were probably 100,000 people on the field at Bowling Field in Washington, D.C. He was greeted by the United States Secretary of State and the Mexican ambassador. The U.S. government had 2 regiments of cavalry drawn up in review as he landed. It was a big, big deal. Now, interestingly enough, when I did a little bit more research, I've known about Carranza most of my life, been interested and talked about him before, but I did some research, and I think it says something to the man himself. One of the first acts that he did when he got to Washington, D.C., and when, probably brushed the dust off from the flight, we're going to take a moment to break for a commercial, and we'll be right back with History for My Grandchildren on Radio Vision Network.
Saving your business money is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Tanker Consulting Services, a payment solutions expert, will show you how with a free, detailed, written analysis illustrating your cost savings. We usually uncover savings between 10 and 25%, and sometimes more. We can help your business succeed by providing reliable and secure merchant payment solutions such as merchant services programs, point-of-sale systems, and ATM machines. TCS, one of the leaders in regional credit card processing consulting, offers electronic payments to merchants locally and nationwide through our preferred vendor programs. We work to keep business costs down with a comprehensive suite of quality products, services, and customized credit card processing programs exclusively tailored for your company. TCS is convenient, reliable, and innovative, with customer service available 24/7, 365 days a year. Our in-depth industry knowledge, partnership strategy, and innovative processing solutions allow for a specialized approach to providing merchant bank processing with 100% full fee disclosure. TCS is one-stop shopping for all your merchant services solutions. Our clients save money 100% of the time. Trust Tanker Consulting Services, the knowledgeable, professional, and friendly provider of secure payment services. We set the standard by which others are measured. Call now for a free written analysis. 609-922-0201.
We're back with Radio Vision Network, History for My Grandchildren. I'm Bill Moore, and we're going to resume talking about Emilio Carranza. As I said in the first segment, one of the first official acts that he did after he brushed the dust off, got cleaned up, got settled, He went to Arlington Cemetery and laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. This speaks to the military man. This speaks to the goodwill of this Mexican goodwill ambassador who did this in the United States. The next day he had lunch. Remember, this is a Mexican Army captain. He had lunch with President Calvin Coolidge. Interestingly enough, this luncheon took place not at the White House, but at the Pan American Union. And one of the newspapers of the day said that it was at the Pan American Union because there were no provisions at the White House because Coolidge was ready to go on vacation. I find that interesting. I find it a little bit humorous. He continued, after all the official receptions in Washington, he continued a flight. He went to New York, flew into Roosevelt Field, Long Island. He was met by then Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. Yes, he would be a future president. And by the mayor of New York City, the flamboyant Jimmy the Hat Walker. Okay. He stayed at the Waldorf Astoria. It must have been a joyous time. It must have been a wonderful time because not only was he there, his friend Lindbergh was there. He met the mayor. He met a future president of the United States. He was asked to review the troops at West Point. Again, a very high honor, the only captain who had ever been asked to review the troops at West Point. Okay. He's at the Waldorf Astoria, and an interesting fact, his father was a diplomat posted to the Mexican consulate in New York City. So he actually had a reunion with his dad. I thought that was pretty neat. Well, all kinds of receptions and everything like that. It gets over and gets done. Now it's time for the return flight to Mexico City. Now remember, when he flew north, he flew over the Jersey Pines, okay? 50 or so miles from New York City. He must have looked at the terrain. One of the largest unbroken tracts of land east of the Mississippi River. As a pioneer aviator, you were always looking for places to land. What's the topography down there? If my engine quits, if the weather goes bad, if something happens, do I have a place to safely land? Well, he's ready for the return trip. Weather is bad, bad, and badder. Okay? No long distance forecasts like we have today. No Weather Channel, no on-the-spot bulletins and things like that. So they wait. They go back to the Waldorf Astoria. Lindbergh advised him, Emilio, wait, don't go. The weather is bad. There are terrible thunderstorms. Those thunderstorms are out over Long Island. They extend down into and through the Jersey Pines. You've got a weather system. This is July, almost the middle of July. You have terrible storm conditions possible at any time. Well, something caused him to make that return flight the night of the 12th of July. Okay? He told the crowd that he was going to cancel the flight because there were thousands upon thousands. Remember, this was the infancy of aviation. These things were a big deal, and there were thousands of spectators. He said he was going to cancel the flight. They went home, and he took off. 50 miles later, or approximately 50 miles later, he encountered a terrible, terrible electrical storm. Anyone who has been out in the pines during one of these storms, or anyone who has been up in the air or out on the water, knows that these storms are horrendous. The power is monumental. He crashed. He was killed. Place right outside of Chatsworth, place called Sandy Ridge. Now, when the investigators from Fort Monmouth went to investigate the crash scene, they found that the throttles had been cut back. They found that the spark had been retarded on the engine, and they found a flashlight, his flashlight, still clutched in his hand. He was trying to land, and he was within a mile or two of what were then and are now cleared farm fields. He didn't make it, tragically. And that's the local connection to Burlington County. But it goes even further than that. The next day, the Carr family was out picking blueberries or some type of berry, huckleberries, depends on what reference you read. They found remnants of the plane, they found the plane, they found the wreckage, and they found his body. His body was taken into Chatsworth, taken to Busby's General Store, which is still there. There's a small garage in the back, and that's where his body was taken. The local American Legion post in Mount Holly found out about it. They brought an American flag. They had a makeshift coffin, and they draped this fallen hero's body in an American flag. Within a day or two, a contingent of U.S. Army officers accompanied Emilio Carranza's body back to Mexico City by train, where he was given a hero's funeral. A tragedy, a true tragedy. Okay, on a goodwill flight to Mexico City. Now let me give you a little bit of background about Carranza. How did he become involved in aviation? Well, his uncle started the Mexican Air Force. His uncle started the Mexican Aviation School. His great uncle was president of Mexico. Emilio Carranza Rodriguez was a member of one of the first families of Mexico. As I said earlier, he was born in 1905, and this period from the turn of the 1900s up to about 1920 or so was a turbulent period in Mexico's history. There were various revolutions and things like that. Remember, during 1916, we had to send a punitive expedition to Mexico because of the deprivations of Pancho Villa, the Mexican bandit who was on the side of one of the revolutionary armies. It caused, at that time, the Carranza family to have to flee for safety to Texas. Emilio Carranza spent a large part of his early years growing up in Texas. After the demise of the revolution, the Carranza family was able to move back. The great uncle was president of Mexico. When the great uncle died, they had to leave again. Turbulence again. Mexican politics were not stable at that time. So back to Texas they came. Emilio Carranza actually graduated from high school in Eagle Pass, Texas. So not only was he a Mexican hero, he also had grown up in the culture of the United States. He was a true man of both nations. I think that family history is interesting. Well, since he was so revered in Mexico, a monument was proposed to be built on the crash site. We're going to break for a commercial at this point, and I'll be back to tell you about that monument.
Sub some sizzle. This is the way. The way it's always been. The way it always should be. The way it always will be. Because that's just the way it's supposed to be. Jersey Mike's. Be a sub above.
Simply Gents, located in Marlton, New Jersey, takes care of all your grooming needs, including haircuts, straight razor shaves, massages, facials, manicures, pedicures, and waxing. To find more information or book an appointment, visit us online at www.simplygents.com. The secret weapon of a well-groomed man, Simply Gents.
If you haven't been to Speed Raceway, what are you waiting for? You want to live fast? You want to make every second count? Then grab the family. Round up the guys. Speed Raceway is 100,000 square feet of excitement, whether you're a kid or a kid at heart. Speed Raceway is the place for endless fun all summer long. Log on to speedraceway.com or just get here now.
When it's time for Jersey Mike's to make a really great sub, this is what we do. It's what we've been doing. It's what we've always done. It's what we'll always do. So what are you doing? Jersey Mike's. Be a sub above.
Today's show was brought to you by Alicia Kelly of White Horse RV Center in Williamstown, New Jersey. Alicia is your RV expert. Contact Alicia at alicia@whitehorserv.com or give her a call at 856-262-1717, extension 203. When you think of RV, think Alicia Kelly.
Today's show has been sponsored by Farmers Insurance in Voorhees, New Jersey. To protect your assets and the people you love, call Mike Skoranek, your local Farmers Insurance agent, at 856-336-2553.
We are farmers. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.
We're back with Radio Vision Network. I'm Bill Moore, and this is History for My Grandchildren. And we'll resume the story of Captain Emilio Carranza, pioneer Mexican aviator. As I said, after his death and after the suitable military funeral that was given him in Mexico, they wanted to have a monument erected in his honor at the site where he crashed. Okay, so Mexican school children saved their money, saved their pennies, and a 12-foot high monument made of granite blocks quarried near his home in Mexico was erected. This is kind of a unique monument. It has four sides, and there's something on symbolism on each of the four sides. Okay, these sides tell a story. On one side there's an arrow, and that arrow is pointing up because he looked to the skies. From his earliest days hanging around the airport with his uncle and his family and his brother, he always wanted to fly. So that arrow symbolizes his look to the heavens, his look to the skies. On another side, there's an Aztec eagle. And tragically, that Aztec eagle is heading down, which symbolizes his crash, his demise. On another side, there's an inscription, and it reads, "The Ambassador of Peace," and goodwill ambassador, and it's hoped that he realized his aspirations for peace and goodwill are realized. I paraphrased it, but that's basically what it said. And on the final side, there are footprints. And you look at those, and what symbolism could those footprints mean for an aviator? A man whose vision was always in the sky. Well, those footprints symbolized his final steps on earth before his demise. Now, this monument was erected sometime in the early 1930s. By 1999, it needed care. And the New Jersey State Legislature got together local representatives, and they decided and they voted to appropriate $95,000 to refurbish the monument and to provide for its upkeep. And interestingly enough, every year since the crash, there's been a memorial service at this site, led by the Legion Post in the area, and Mexican representatives have come to speak and to lay wreaths. It's quite a moving ceremony, and it's usually on the Saturday closest to the date of the crash. In 2015, to give you an idea of how important that ceremony is, this is what, 80 some years later, the commander of the Mexican Air Force flew here to give one of the speeches and to lay a wreath for one of his own, one of the early flyers in Mexico. So that's how important it is both to the Mexicans, the Mexican government, and to the local people. He flew a flight for goodwill. That goodwill has been maintained all these 80 some years, and he's remembered for that. Now for you aviation buffs, I want to talk a little bit about the plane. The name of the plane was the Mexico Excelsior. Mexico because of the country of Mexico that he came from. Excelsior because of the newspaper that proposed this. It was a Ryan monoplane, a high-wing monoplane, almost identical to Lindbergh's plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, that he flew the Atlantic with. This plane was modified, of course, just like Lindbergh's, extra fuel tanks, made it a lot more difficult to take off. It made it a lot more difficult to fly, but Emilio Carranza was up to the task. If you look, I believe they have some photos up here in this segment or one of the segments on this show that show you the Mexico Excelsior and Emilio Carranza. Now, I want to go briefly back into his early days. He graduated at 21 from the Mexican Aviation School. He was commissioned a second lieutenant. He was sent to fight the Yaqui Rebellion. This was one of the revolutions that swept Mexico at this time. And he crashed during that rebellion, probably as a result of ground fire. Emilio Carranza may be one of the early proponents of ground support for the troops. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the photos of Emilio Carranza, look carefully, his face was destroyed in this crash, but it was reconstructed very, very well done. Okay? This again goes back to the fact that he was one of the first families of Mexico. They had the means for this pioneer reconstructive surgery. And if you look at him in the photos, he's still a handsome, dashing Mexican aviator. Again, I want to bring you back to those last minutes. Just imagine, here he is, flying home to Mexico, not too long into that flight back. He encounters the horrible, horrible storm. Lightning, violent updrafts, downdrafts, probably hail, tremendous wind. It's buffeting the plane. The plane is hard to control. He knows it's time to get out of the air. But where to go? Where to look? He remembers those open spots. I know he had to. That's one of the attributes of these pioneer aviators. They knew where they were. He was looking for those open fields. He came this close, figuratively speaking. He was within a mile or two of that landing, that safe landing in a field. We know that he was trying to land. Again, I'll repeat what the investigators from Fort Monmouth found. The throttle was cut back. The spark was retarded. He was trying to set down. And tragically, he still had his flashlight. Imagine this. In the dark of night, in a terrible thunderstorm, you're flying a plane single-handedly. You're in an area that you're not very familiar with. You've only been past this area once. You're trying to look out the window with a flashlight. You're flying an aircraft. This is what these early aviators had to deal with. This is how difficult these long-distance flights were. Just imagine, think about this. You're sitting in the cockpit of a plane, you're flying for hours and hours and hours on end. You know what it's like when you go on a commercial flight. If it's over 4 or 5 hours, if you're flying to South Africa, if you're flying to the Philippines, you're talking about 17, 18 hours. They tell you to get up and walk around. Do you think that he was able to get up and walk around? Who was going to fly the plane? You had to be at the controls, and the controls were rudimentary. You had a compass. You might have had an altimeter to tell you how high you were, if you couldn't look out the window and see where you were. Other than that, there wasn't a lot of instrumentation. This was seat of the pants flying at its very best. But these are the guys like Emilio Carranza, Charles Lindbergh, who pioneered flying as we know it today. Now it's not a big deal to go down to your nearest airport and take a flight anywhere in the world. Again, thanks for watching Radio Vision Network, History for My Grandchildren. I'm host Bill Moore, and I'll be back next week. Next week, I think we're going to talk about Burlington Island. Again, thanks for watching. Have any comments, send them to me in care of the station. I would appreciate anything and all. Again, Radio Vision Network, History for My Grandchildren, with Bill Moore. Thanks for watching.
Today's show is sponsored by Hargrove Demolition, your demolition experts. Hargrove is a family-owned and operated business right here in the southern New Jersey area, bringing you 45 years of demolition expertise. Hargrove has all your demolition needs, from emergency demolition service to demolition equipment rental. Hargrove is one of the state-approved recycling facilities right here in the southern New Jersey area. No job is too big or too small for Hargrove Demolition. Contact them today at one of their 3 locations.
When it's time for Jersey Mike's to give a sub some sizzle, this is the way. The way it's always been. The way it always should be. The way it always will be. Because that's just the way it's supposed to be. Jersey Mike's. Be a sub above.
If you haven't been to Speed Raceway, what are you waiting for? You want to live fast? You want to make every second count? Then grab the family. Round up the guys. Speed Raceway is 100,000 square feet of excitement, whether you're a kid or a kid at heart. Speed Raceway is the place for endless fun all summer long. Log on to speedraceway.com or just get here now.
When we make Beyond Natural dry dog and cat foods, we start with real meat as the first ingredient. We leave out corn, wheat, and soy. And we own where our dry food is made. 100%. Can other brands say all that? For nutrition you can trust and your pet will enjoy. Does your food go beyond? Learn more at purinabeyond.com.
Extra Innings is the nation's premier indoor baseball and softball training center, featuring indoor batting cages, 7 multi-use tunnels, and training rooms. Extra Innings can provide professional instruction, private and group lessons, and the best year-round clinics. Along with a nationally recognized pro shop that features the latest and widest selection of equipment and apparel, our experienced staff can provide you with the right instruction and help you find the best equipment for your ability and budget. Extra Innings, where the game never ends.
Today's show has been sponsored by More Than Gifts. Come see our new location in Marlton, New Jersey. Not just gifts, but more.